This is a short story, but honestly, the thought of it turning for the worse is what really makes this story give me the chills. Jane was in her mid-20s back in the early 80s, living in a small town in Oregon. She was the kind of person who would go out of her way to help others. One weekend, she had to drive to Portland, about a 2-hour journey from her town. As she was driving, she noticed a man walking along the side of the road. He turned and, in typical hitchhiker fashion, stuck out his thumb. Being the kind-hearted person she was, Jane pulled over and asked if he needed help. The man, polite but shy, asked for a ride into the city. Jane smiled and opened the passenger door. He tossed his bag into the back seat and buckled up. They chatted for most of the trip, discussing friends, the news, and other small talk. Jane felt like they were getting along well. About halfway there, they stopped for dinner at a roadside diner. The man seemed flustered when Jane insisted on paying, but he eventually accepted, mentioning that he was low on cash, which was why he was hitchhiking. As they neared Portland, the man thanked Jane profusely and asked to be dropped off downtown. Before leaving, he asked for her phone number to keep in touch. Jane, feeling good about making a new friend, gave it to him. A week later, Jane received a call from the same man. Before she could say much, he started talking rapidly, telling her that she should be grateful for her kindness. He confessed that when he first got into her car, he had planned to rape and murder her at the pit stop. He was going to steal her car and dispose of her body further down the road. But after she talked to him so kindly and even treated him to dinner, he couldn't bring himself to do it. He said he couldn't live with himself if he had harmed such a nice person. His final words to Jane were, "Please, Jane, never ever pick up another hitchhiker." Then he hung up. Jane never heard from him again. When she tried calling back, the number led to a payphone. From that story, I've learned one crucial thing. I'm taking that man's advice. Never, ever pick up a hitchhiker. I've learned one thing from my one and only experience picking up a hitchhiker, and that's to never pick up a hitchhiker. It was a Saturday night, probably around 1 in the morning. I was driving down Highway 19 in rural Oregon, a route I often took to get into town. It was a long stretch of nothing but dense forest on either side with the occasional farmhouse. I was on my way back home from town, and as usual at this time of night around our quiet old town, there wasn't a single other car on the road. I turned on the off-road lights on my Jeep to have optimal vision on the unlit highway, which allowed me to spot somebody far down the road just standing at the side. As I got closer, I saw him raise his arm up and stick out his thumb. He was trying to hitch a ride. My heart started racing. I had no idea if I should stop or not. I slowed down just to get a better look at the guy. He seemed like a younger man, maybe 28. He had on a light gray hoodie with the hood over his head and blue denim jeans. The time to make a decision was immediate, and with the lack of my better judgment in the heat of the moment, I came to a stop, rolled down the window, and asked, "Where are you heading to, friend?" "Just up the road," he said in a deep, quiet tone. "Hop in," I said. He opened the door to my Jeep and stepped inside slowly. Jeep Wranglers have very tight seals on the doors, so when he tried to close the door the first time, it didn't shut. I politely said, "Oh, the door didn't shut. Just open and slam it shut real hard. These doors are hard to close." The body language he was giving off in response was unsettling. About 3 seconds after I had finished my sentence, he looked at me, then turned his head slowly to the right, and again waited 3 or 4 more seconds before finally opening the door, and then slamming it back shut. By the way this guy was moving, I already regretted my decision to let him in. I put my foot on the gas, and we started moving along the road. The speed limit on this road was 55, but I was going 75 just to get the guy to his destination quicker. "So, how far did you say you're going?" I asked. There was an awkward gap of silence before he replied, "Just a few miles up." I wanted to turn the radio on to kill this awkward and downright creepy silence, but something in my head told me not to for whatever reason. Suddenly, I could see just through the corner of my eye that the man had turned his head and was staring in my direction. At this point, I was telling myself that I needed to get this guy out of my car. For a good mile, I felt his gaze just hitting me like a brick, and all the while I tried my best not to look back. Finally, he turned his head the other way and said, I've been wondering for the longest time if it's just worth it to end it all. I looked at him in confusion. He dug his hand into his pocket and said, I've been carrying this knife with me for the past few weeks, wondering when the right time would come. He pulled out a big red knife from his pocket, and at that instant I felt like my stomach had dropped out of my body. I told him to put the knife away immediately. He told me in a calm, emotionless voice, pull over next to that sign. I did what he said, coming to a stop next to a speed limit sign, and what followed still haunts me. He began to slit his forearm next to 3 other scars from previous assumed self-inflicted cuts and let out a disturbing moan. I managed to choke out the words, "You need to get out of my car right now, buddy." He looked at me again and said, "Get out of the car. I want to show you something." I told him no, and he raised his knife up closer to me as an obvious threat. "Just get out for a second. There's something I want to show you behind that sign." I knew my life was on the line and I had to be smart. I said, "Yeah, okay, man, let's go." I opened the door to my Jeep, making a point of leaving it open, raised my hands in the air, and backed away slowly from the door. He too left the car and started walking over to my side. At the exact moment that he was directly behind the car, I jumped back in, threw it into drive, and floored it down the road, never looking back. I got back home within 10 minutes, still breathing heavily and wanting to throw up. This was the scariest thing that has ever happened to me, and I urge everybody and anybody that if you, by some chance, see a hitchhiker on a dead road at some odd hours of the night, do not take any course of action other than speeding right past them. Three months after I finally turned 16, I got my first car. A 1999 Toyota Camry. On a warm Saturday night, my friend Jake invited me to a big party at one of his friend's house. Knowing I wouldn't be in any condition to drive the Camry home afterward, we carpooled with Jake's girlfriend, Emily. We lived in the countryside of Vermont, so big parties were a rare and exciting event. We lived about 5 to 10 minutes away from this kid's house. I knew where he lived as I was acquainted with him, but we weren't exactly friends. The whole ride there, we took the same 2-lane road through the woods. The kid's house was further down this road. At certain points, there were a few houses on either side, then it would just go back to being a long, empty stretch again. The house was on the smaller side, like many around the area, but the party was held outside since his closest neighbors were far enough away that noise wasn't an issue. I'll skip most of the party up until the point that Emily, our designated driver, had to leave suddenly for a family emergency. Jake said it was fine and that we'd find a ride home. Fast forward a few hours and a few drinks and I could barely walk straight. I checked my watch, it was 2 a.m. I figured it was time to go. I started looking for Jake, but I couldn't find him anywhere. It seemed like everyone I knew had already left. I could barely think straight, but I was furious at the thought that Jake might have left without me. I asked to use the party host's phone and dialed Jake's home number. After 2 tries, I gave up, realizing I shouldn't wake his family. Not knowing what else to do, I dizzily stepped out onto the road and began walking home. I knew the walk would take anywhere from half an hour to an hour in my condition. Maybe 15 minutes later, I saw the faint shine of car headlights approaching from behind. Jumping for joy inside, I lifted up my arm and stuck out my thumb. As the car neared, it slowed down and stopped next to me. The man driving the '98 Ford Explorer rolled down the window and asked where I was headed. I told him my house was just down the road and beyond the right turn, probably slurring my words beyond comprehension. He chuckled and told me to hop in. I thanked him and joyously climbed into the truck. I was exhausted, and I remember disregarding the things the guy was asking me because I was so close to passing out. And that's exactly what happened. The memories of being in that truck turned to fog as I fell asleep. The next thing I remember, I woke up still in the moving truck. The guy looked at me and laughed, but didn't say anything. I looked around and realized the road we were on wasn't familiar. Nervously, I asked, where are we going? Instead of answering my straightforward question, he asked, so what were you doing out this late anyway? The sobering reality of the situation hit me. You can let me out anywhere, I told the man. He responded with a firm no. I felt like throwing up as he said that. No, I really felt like I was going to throw up. I started to gag, feeling more nauseous by the second. The man took his eyes off the road to look at me. And that's when I thought of the perfect distraction. I turned towards him and continued to gag. He leaned away and slowed down the car. Thankfully, I had drunk as much as I did because I finally threw up, making sure to do it all over the man's lap. He yelled in frustration and stopped the car. That was my cue to run for my life into the woods and duck behind a few bushes. The man came following into the woods with a flashlight. Twice he shined the light straight over me without noticing. Eventually I heard his footsteps move further into the woods past me. That was when I ran back to his truck, but he had locked it. By some miracle, I saw another car approaching in the distance. I ran out into the middle of the road, waving my arms like a lunatic. The car tried to avoid me, but I wouldn't let it. They were forced to stop, and I yelled for help before the man came back. Once I explained I had been kidnapped, the driver agreed to give me a lift not to the police station, but to my house. I made it back safely, and I couldn't thank the driver enough. I immediately woke my parents and told them what happened. My dad asked if I got the guy's tag number, and I felt like punching myself in the face. I had failed to get the simplest information that would have allowed me to report him. All I knew was that he drove a faded blue '99 Ford Explorer. I made sure to give Jake a piece of my mind. Part of me always held a grudge against him for abandoning me at the party without telling me. I haven't seen him in 4 years now.